You're listening to the Co-Main Event Podcast. And now your hosts, Fowlkes and Chad Dundas.
That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your co-host from BleacherReport.com, Chad Dundas. And joining me, as always, from MMA Junkie and USA Today, it's your friend and mine, Mr. Ben Fowlkes. Ben, how you doing this week?
Doing all right. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. We got the big streaming event coming up on Friday.
I am very excited.
I know that there was some controversy surrounding the streaming event. I don't know if you want to bring that up now or if you want to roll into that in a couple minutes. It's going to be your call as the grand poobah of the Co-Main Event Podcast Patreon.
Listen, here's what I'll say. We very much intended to let the listeners decide which Gina Carano film we're going to watch.
Either Haywire or In the Blood.
Right.
But then,
in our defense, we did not know about Scorched Earth.
New shit had come to light.
That's right.
A lot of ins and outs.
Brent Brookhouse, formerly of MMA Junkie and Bloody Elbow, he alerted us to the existence of a film that just came out in February of this year called Scorched Earth. It looks like it's a tight 96 minutes, which is just perfect. And in this film, Gina Carano plays a, narrowly futuristic bounty hunter in a post-apocalyptic near future, which just that combination of words that I just said makes you feel like, yep, I gotta see this shit.
In our defense, once you see the trailer for Scorched Earth, it leaves no other option on the table.
No.
Right? You can go to, imdb.com?
Yeah, you can watch it on IMDb.
They got the trailer up there. It is really something. It's the kind of film that cries out for a Co-Main Event Podcast Patreon streaming event.
That's right.
Absolutely cries out for it, Ben.
Couple of guys to sit around drinking some soda pops, watching the film, and
getting really scared for the cloud fall, right?
That's right. Gotta watch out for that cloud fall. And we might just have a special guest with us, watching along and making hilarious wisecracks.
I don't even know who that could be, so we'll find out.
But the thing people are going to want to take note of is that this will be a live streaming event only for the $5 and $10 patrons of the Co-Main Event Podcast.
The $1 million men and women.
That's right. The people who make the magic happen. Now, if you're a $1 Patreon patron, you'll still get access to it. It'll just be later on, maybe the next week. I think we're going to do like a week later. Then you can have access to it. If you want to get on it live, enjoy the action of Scorched Earth with us. And this time, we're going to make it so that you can actually watch the movie with us. You do not have to queue it up yourself the way we did with the Fight Pass thing. You show up to watch the streaming event. We will give you both Scorched Earth and our own commentary.
Woo, I have a hard time believing we have that technology, but I'm interested to find out if we can do it.
Yeah.
Once again, this episode of the Co-Main Event Podcast is brought to you in part by our friends at Fulton and Rourke. Last week, we started to tell you about Palmetto, the newest limited reserve fragrance to be added to the Fulton and Rourke lineup. Pretty much everything they make is spectacular, and now that we've received our own samples of this new solid cologne, we've smelled it for ourselves, and it's excellent. Here, Ben, take a whiff.
Well, that's delightful, Chad. I'm really picking up the clean and citrusy top notes. Pink pepper spice, and I want to say magnolia flower?
I would be very much surprised if a heathen such as yourself has the educated nose to pick up those scents. But what we can say for sure is that Palmetto will help you smell better and feel more confident as you go about your day.
Yeah, like all F&R products, it comes packaged in a handy, refillable metal container and is equipped with a 30-day, no-questions-asked returns policy. So if you don't like it, you can get your money back. You go to FultonandRourke.com today and scoop up some Palmetto while supplies last. As always, use the promo code CME at checkout to get 15% off your first order. And you know what? Now that's had a few moments to sink in, I really am getting the lingering notes of incense and cedar.
Oh, will you stop? Ben, how do the people who want to get in on the Patreon for this week's Scorched Earth live stream, how do they do that?
You go to patreon.com/co-main event, become a $5 or a $10 Patreon patron of the Co-Main Event Podcast. Then you show up Friday night, 8 p.m. in the One True Time Zone, and we are going to see what hellish landscape the near future looks like, which only Gina Carano can tame.
We got music again this week from our friend The Fifth Element, a music producer from Fort Worth, Texas. If you like what you hear, you can check him out on Twitter at The Fifth Element, Facebook.com/The Fifth Element, or SoundCloud.com/The Fifth Element Official. 3 rounds, as usual, this week in the co-main event podcast. In round number 1, UFC 224 is this weekend. Did you forget? It's okay if you forgot, but Amanda Nunes puts the women's bantamweight title on the line against Raquel Pennington, so that at least sounds like something worth remembering. And in round number 2, what's really going on with Invicta FC, which staged an event last weekend where Sarah Kaufman and Pearl Gonzalez both got wins, and some poor soul damn near broke her finger clean off. And in round number 3, running head-to-head with UFC 224 on Saturday will be Bellator 199, featuring Ryan Bader's heavyweight Grand Prix fight against King Mo. Wait, don't turn off the podcast. What if we told you this one is free? All that plus Are You Fucking Kidding Me and Just Saying Stuff. But first, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail. You
Daniel,
want to know what the tagline is of Scorched Earth?
No, what is it?
Bringing men to justice is her only reward.
Well, see, you can't with that kind of magic.
Come on.
It's like they wrote it just for us.
Yep.
We wanted to get into listener mail quickly this week, Ben, because we got a lot of good questions. So let's do that right now. This first message comes to us from David Flannery. He writes, "This weekend we have ourselves the soon-to-be 40-year-old dragon Lyoto Machida, who is 2-4 in his last 6 fights, versus the 41-year-old young dinosaur Vitor Belfort, who is also 2-4 in his last 6 fights, counting the overturned TKO loss to Kelvin Gastelum as a loss. I still don't completely know how I feel about this one. Could it be a fun fight? Absolutely. If/when one of these two loses consciousness due to a shin to the dome or something of the like, am I going to cringe and mutter, ouch, under my breath? Yep, sure am. Personally, I wouldn't be mad if the stakes on this one were that the loser retires and the winner also retires. Despite each of them winning their last fights respectively by decision, I'm just to the point where I would like to see them both move on and be done taking damage, so hopefully they aren't drooling into their Cheerios by the time they turn 60. What say you?" Now, Ben, this is this the co-main event?
No.
There? Oh, it's not even.
It's
the curtain jerk.
Yeah, it kicks off the main card.
Yeah, okay. I don't have that in front of me, so.
You got this, and then John Lineker, Brian Kelleher, then Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Cooper, Jacare, and Kelvin Gastelum is your co-main event.
You know, UFC 224 is the sort of card that doesn't jump off the screen at you in terms of what you might want to plunk down your 65 bones to watch over there on pay-per-view. But like legitimately some quote unquote fun or interesting fights on this card.
It is one of those fight cards though where if I just read off every fight on the main card and told you to guess what nation it was happening in, I feel like you'd be able to guess.
I would be able to guess, and also if you told me to guess whether or not it was a pay-per-view card or on Fox Sports 1, I might have a hard time.
Okay.
Which is maybe not the biggest compliment. But let's talk about Vitor Belfort versus Lyoto Machida, which, as Mr. Flannery points out, is it one we have mixed emotions about?
Yeah, the depression quotient possibility is especially high on this one because, like he says, it's one where you would be fine with seeing either the winner or the loser retire afterwards. And it seems like maybe the best thing you could have going for it is that what if they don't have the juice in it anymore to really hurt each other? Like the thing we used to say about these kind of like Bellator senior tour things where it's like, well, hey, as long as you have them fight other old guys, and then they're relatively safe. Nobody's going to get hurt too bad. Is that what's going on here?
Did you just say they don't have the juice in them to really hurt each other?
You question my choice of words?
No pun intended, I assume? No,
they don't have the DHEA.
I mean, I agree with you. I guess if we're going to have these guys soldier on, I would rather have Vitor Belfort fight Lyoto Machida rather than like sacrifice either of these guys to another young lion on his way up. And I don't know, man, like, you know, Vitor Belfort obviously became the poster child for the TRT era in the sport. As his MMA career has gone on, it has only gotten stranger from the time that he showed up on the scene as a yoked up 19-year-old, blitzing everybody with his fast hands. It's just gotten stranger and stranger. He obviously suffered some unthinkable personal tragedy in the middle of that. He's an odd figure in the landscape of the sport at this point, and obviously still very popular down there in Brazil. And then on the other side of the octagon, you got Lyoto Machida, another guy who has sort of a singular profile in this sport, as a big-time fan favorite, a guy who we thought was maybe going to be the standard bearer of the light heavyweight division there for a little while. Things obviously didn't quite work out, in that way. So you got two kind of unique Brazilian legends in a way. And when you talk about a fight to kick off the UFC 224 pay-per-view main card, like, it seems like a solid choice to me.
It does seem like a really interesting stylistic matchup, and a part of me wishes that it were happening in a different era, because I am curious to kind of see how, especially at this point, how their styles are going to match up. Like, I have to give the edge here to Lyoto Machida.
You'd think. Yeah.
At the same time, though, what if Vitor Belfort goes out there, pulls off some, the one kind of thing you could say about Vitor Belfort is that early in the fight especially, he's always capable of pulling off one awesome move. He can do that at any time.
Yeah.
You get him, especially these days, you get him into the second and third round, you're probably pretty safe. But first 2 minutes, maybe Vitor Belfort goes out there, pulls off something awesome, knocks out Lyoto Machida, and then says, you know what? I got 5 more years left in me. Like, is the best possible outcome that, regardless of who wins, who loses, everybody can just kind of go home feeling good, feeling like we're closing some books up here.
Yeah, but do we really think that would ever happen? Like, as long as we don't get into a double knockout or a draw, like, one of these guys is going to win. And we've talked about at length on the podcast before, the impossibility of walking away from this sport, either feeling like a loser because you're coming off of a loss, but because you just notched a big win and then you think, I still got it. I got to soldier on. So I don't know that we're going to get dueling retirements here. I don't know that we should get our hopes up for that.
No.
Next question this week comes to us from Andrew Pearson. He writes, I got the bat signal that was your email about listener mail, so I booted up my browser to see what fights are coming up. Surprisingly, it was Bellator 199 that caught my eye. John Fitch is debuting against Paul Daly, a big boost to Bellator's most stacked division. How does John Fitch do against Paul Daly, and will he find himself title fight adjacent with a win?
Well, this seems like exactly the kind of fight we've seen both John Fitch and Paul Daly in before when you think about how their style's going to match up, right?
Yeah, it seems like something of a rerun, right?
Paul Daly's going to want to stand there and bang. John Fitch is going to want to take him down and keep him there. If he's successful in taking him down and keeping him there, Paul Daly is probably going to act aggrieved about it, as if this is somehow outside the rules. And then John Fitch is going to, if John Fitch can't get him down on the ground, then John Fitch is probably going to get knocked out.
Yeah, here's my question about 40-year-old Jonathan Parker Fitch. Back in the 2013, 2014, maybe all the way back to 2011 era, when John Fitch was going 1-3-1, getting kind of drummed out of the UFC and headed over to World Series of Fighting, and it seemed like maybe his best days were behind him. You'd look at this and you'd think, man, I give Paul Daly a good shot here. Does it mean anything to you, Ben, that John Fitch is now on a 4-fight win streak to close out his career in World Series of Fighting and then notch his first win in the PFL? And he's got wins over Yushin Okami, Jake Shields, and Brian Foster during that run. Like, does that make you feel like, hey, John Fitch is back, he's the guy to bet on here? Or do you still think, we're probably going to see John Fitch get stopped?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say John Fitch is back or he's, back on near the top of the welterweight division. But I do think a guy like Paul Daly is a really winnable fight for him. Just because everybody knows if you have some takedowns in your back pocket, you're going to want to use them against Paul Daly. And if you can do that, then you can probably beat him. If you can't do that, then you're in a lot of damn trouble, unless you're Nick Diaz.
Right.
So I have no problem picturing him going out there and winning this fight. I mean, against Paul Daly, a guy who hits hard, if he can manage to stop one takedown or just take advantage of every round starting on the feet, then who knows? He might be able to catch you and knock you out. I'd never say that that's outside the realm of possibility, but John Fitch should win this fight. Now, as far as what that is going to mean long term, I don't know. Like, is he title fight adjacent, as this question asks, if he goes out there and beats Paul Daly? I mean, in Bellator, given what's going on there right now?
Right, like, I mean, if you're Bellator, you could do a lot worse than John Fitch versus Rory McDonald, right? Even though John Fitch is an statesman at this point, a guy that maybe we don't know, what we're going to get from him from a fight-to-fight basis, and clearly you would have to put all the money you had in your pocket down on Rory McDonald if you were so inclined to make a bet on that fight if they actually booked it. But like, as we've said a lot of times before, like you're dealing with a different set of expectations for Bellator than you are with the UFC. And you see, Rory McDonald, one of the top welterweights in the world. John Fitch, a guy who once upon a time was one of the top welterweights in the world. Two names two faces you recognize. It's not going to do dynamite ratings for Bellator, but it's also not too shabby. So yeah, that would be fine. We talked a little bit, Ben, about how the UFC 224 card might be kind of sneaky. You look at this Bellator 199 card, and it kind of seems like the same thing, right? Because you got Ryan Bader versus King Mo at the top of it, but then you got John Fitch versus Paul Daly, which, yeah, probably would watch. Czech Congo's on the card, which could go any number of different ways. You need to get some chips from the kitchen. You might want to do that. But you also got Aaron Pico also on this thing, fighting another person without a Wikipedia page, trying to take the next step towards proving that he was the prospect that we thought he was on his way up to the big leagues. So like with this card going head to head with the UFC, if you don't want to plunk down the money for UFC 224, like you're not shit out of luck. Like Bellator 199, it might make a pleasing substitute, I would think.
True, but when you mention King Mo versus Ryan Bader, John Fitch versus Paul Daly, and Czech Congo just in existence, you have the potential for 3 long bouts.
It could be a grind, my friend.
Yes.
It will also be free.
That's true.
Live and free over on the Paramount Network.
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't know if you want to say you get what you pay for, but I'm just saying if you're sitting at home, maybe times are a little tight. You don't feel like you can lay down the cash for UFC 224. I would think you could plug into Bellator 199 and not feel like you had totally been kicked to the curb by the rest of the MMA universe.
True.
You'd still be having your own kind of fun. Next question this week comes from Christopher Rudier. He writes, Kyoji Horiguchi knocking dudes out with literally one punch. He's a young, talented, and exciting fighter. Here's the catch. There's no chance that the UFC will ever match the money he's getting from Rizin to fight in the UFC in Dana White's least favorite division. I'm torn. On one hand, I'm always happy to see fighters shop around to get paid what they're actually worth. On the other hand, I really want to see how a more developed Horiguchi would do against the best fighters at 125. Help me solve this deep internal conflict. Yeah, so Ben, Kyoji Horiguchi knocked out Ian McCall. Quick and easy night of work for the Gooch over there. This is part of the Rizin Grand Prix, right? Is it a tournament? We're running a tournament over there in Rizin, are we not?
I don't know if this is part of a tournament.
Oh, I thought it was. I thought it was.
I mean, Ian McCall was in the other tournament. But I don't know if this is
not part of it?
I don't know if this... He was eliminated in that tournament, right? I don't know.
I don't know, man.
Here's the thing with Kyoji Horiguchi, I feel like. For one thing, you've already seen him against Demetrius Johnson, and so it's like, if you're holding out hope, like maybe he's the guy to beat Demetrius Johnson, no. He beat everybody else, pretty much, but like, not Demetrius Johnson. So, isn't it kind of like, you should leave him over there in Rizin where, like, the Japanese fans are going to appreciate him a lot more than he would be appreciated if he were just another guy in the UFC, in any division in the UFC. So, isn't it like a better thing for him? A better thing for just like spreading out kind of the parity in MMA? Like, isn't it better off, even if we don't get to see him fight, some of the fights we would like to see over in the UFC? Isn't MMA as a whole, as the world, better for it being this way?
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I mean, the one caveat to that Demetrius Johnson loss was that Horiguchi was still relatively green. He had 17 fights in his career, but he was still a young guy. He'd only been in the UFC for 4 previous fights before he fought Demetrius Johnson, and clearly has won every fight since then and has continued to develop. So I don't know that he's necessarily a proven commodity. I don't know that you can say if he fought Demetrius Johnson 100 times that Demetrius Johnson would win every time. So there is part of me that's like, oh man, he's one of the top 125-pound fighters in the world. I wish he were still around to at least give Demetrius Johnson another run for his money. On the other hand, I think you make a super valid point, and it seems like among the hardcore mixed martial arts fans, particularly the ones that maybe don't have children and can still stay up all night Ryzen is starting to pick up some momentum, don't you think? Like, there's people out there who are saying Ryzen might be the best thing going right now in MMA because, you know, you are getting relatively competitive fights, at least on paper, between guys like Horiguchi and McCall. You're getting a fresh mixture of JMMA, which is everyone knows as a different art direction. Yeah, let's say
a giant cup of noodles is going to show up,
right? Then you get in the UFC, which obviously appeals to a lot of people. And I think it's positive, as you said, just to have depth all over the world and to have, let's say, a menu of programming that can offer you some different tastes, some different experiences. I think that all that is very good. Although I think you can tell from the fact that I didn't know if Horiguchi and McCall was part of a tournament that, for a lot of different reasons, I'm still pretty American centric in my viewing. But on the other hand, like, get on with your bad self, Ryzen.
Right.
I'm into it.
Plus, and I just feel like for Horiguchi's sake, while there's a part of me that would like to be like, okay, bring him back to the UFC and you can fantasy match make a whole lot of fun fights there, but also the UFC is going to look at him and see just like another UFC fight night guy. They're going to see like, okay, he's on Fox Sports after the ad for Farmers Only.
Right.
And in Ryzen, he's a capital G guy.
Yeah.
Feels like it's better for him to be over there.
Oh, no, yeah, I think completely. And that, isn't that another compliment to Ryzen, sort of, and like something of a detriment to the UFC that they wouldn't think of a guy like Kyoji Horiguchi as maybe a main event star or have that kind of potential?
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense just like to the different demographics that they're playing to, that Ryzen would look at Kyoji Horiguchi and feel like, okay, we have somebody that people are actually going to care about, and the UFC would be like, I don't know, we're looking for another Conor McGregor. And anything else, we're not really that interested.
Let's do this question next because it may be somewhat related, from Paul Scholes, who writes, care to discuss the awesomeness that is the ONE FC Championship app, streaming all their events live with no geo-blocking? Sound off. This is pretty huge, right? Like,
yeah, thanks for one of the most successful footballers in history, according to Wikipedia, Paul Scholes.
Paul Scholes, who sitting around watching fights from ONE FC on his app.
Yeah.
On his phone app. But
this
is legitimately a
Manchester.
kind of a good and big move for ONE FC, right? Like I just said, personally, I, because of my job and some other things, have like a very American-centric view of MMA, and with the UFC doing 150 shows a year, it's hard to really find the time and energy to focus on other stuff. But here you got ONE, like giving you the perfect opportunity, right? With their phone app, no geo blocking. You can watch it all. Like, this is the kind of thing that when I see it pop up on my MMA news feed, I think, oh, that's interesting. Like, that might be something I would want to check out.
Is it just called the Shit-Eating Wild Man app?
Yes.
Because that's what you have to be.
Yep. 4 out of 5 stars from most Shit-Eating Wild
There's a good chance that if you are watching these fights on this app, you're also peeking over the top of your phone every once in a while to check out the constant Russian MMA that's going on your laptop.
Yeah, but I think that's right. But don't you think that this is the kind of thing that more MMA promotions could, at least in theory, benefit from?
Yes.
When you have this super crowded landscape, like, not only experimenting with new ways to deliver their fights to people, but also just sort of like making all of their content so available.
Right. Well, I saw this thing making the rounds on Twitter like yesterday and today about the NBA's approach to like trying to make it so that people will share the highlights more, like trying to get their highlights out on social media, because feeling like, okay, it's not going to be like a substitute for people watching the games. You're just going to get more people in on the games, and how this is like a relatively novel approach for a major pro sports league. And how, like, one of the things that we've complained about with the UFC in the past, where it's like, stop making it more difficult for people to see your product. Like, the more people see it, the more people might become fans and want to tune into this stuff. You have kind of a warped idea of how this works, and it seems like this is embracing that, just being like, all right, make it easier, make it just so that we're eliminating barriers that people have to watching our stuff, and then who knows, the next thing you know, maybe we have some more fans as a result. I mean, I think that has to be the way that this moves if you want to actually gain viewers, rather than make it so it's just like you have to be the hardest of the hardcore willing to stay up at 2 a.m. to watch some cable TV shit.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it seems like a big deal. And that's why I said what I said before, just like, because the landscape is so crowded, because things can be so confusing, because there's so many different factors like jockeying for your attention. Like, this seems awesome to me that if you want to follow One, you got it all right there on your app, and like seems like making it as easy as possible for me as a consumer to keep track of what's going on in your fighting organization is a good thing.
So when you're at like some child's dance recital, you can just pull up
Fuck
your
yeah.
app.
Hell yes. Let's do this one from Joe Mosqueda, who writes, now that you guys are wrestling promoters, haha, thanks, Joe. This past weekend's first ever event from Treasure State Wrestling.
That's right.
Our strategic partnership with Defy out of Seattle. They came to Missoula, put on a hell of a show. It was awesome.
It was awesome.
It was like, couldn't have gone off better, frankly. So here's the rest of Joe's question. Can you describe some of the similarities and differences between pro wrestling and MMA? Also fighters and wrestlers. The more I watch both, the more similarities I see. Pay, revenue sharing, travel, storylines, draws, heels, etc. Now, Ben, I know, we had former UFC fighter and current top independent professional wrestler Matt Riddle in town this past weekend. Took the L, unfortunately, against hometown hero Travis Flip Gordon. But I know that you got to talk to him after the event, cause you're always working. You're always playing an angle. You're out here interviewing Matt Riddle for the MMA Junkie.
Even with a drink in one hand. Still doing it.
And I know that he said some kind of interesting stuff about the two worlds that he now straddles when both feet now in professional wrestling, but as a former UFC fighter. Why don't you lay that on this?
Okay.
Because I thought it was enlightening.
This is a really good quote from Matt Riddle, where I asked him basically about, what do you feel like is the difference between the fans, your relationship to the fans as a wrestler as it was to a pro fighter? He said this. Wrestling fans are like people going to see Shakespeare. They come, they have a favorite character, they're invested in the story, and they know it's a story. They're all about how well you play your part, whatever that part is. MMA fans are more like people going to the Coliseum. They don't care whether you kill the tiger or the tiger kills you. All they know is somebody's gonna die today. That's how it feels when you're in the UFC. Nobody gives a fuck about you. You could be fighting in your hometown, and if you get knocked out, the crowd's still going to roar.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's some learned stuff there from Matt Riddle.
Yeah, and some
the
of that,
professor Matt Riddle.
I feel like you could say a little bit like he exited MMA with kind of like a bad taste in his mouth over how everything went down. And he seems just generally much happier as a pro wrestler and seems to really enjoy that life and the work. And a lot of the stuff he said to me about the differences and about what he liked about it made a lot of sense. For instance, he talks about how, cutting weight was just like the worst part of his life, and you'd have to do it a few times a year. And to not have to ever think about doing that again feels like a great gift, like a great weight has been lifted. And also to get to feel like instead of, I'm going to work 3 or 4 times a year and people are going to base all their opinions off of me based on what they see those 3 or 4 times a year, I'm going to work several times a weekend.
Right. I thought that was interesting that like he feels jazzed, even though he does a lot of travel. I imagine it's like a pretty grueling lifestyle, but at the same time, he gets to perform, 3 or 4 times a week, every single weekend. And he seemed to indicate that that was more enjoyable to him than like doing a fight camp and then showing up to fight just a couple of times a year. Like I thought that was pretty interesting that as an athlete, I don't think it's too surprising that he would get a charge out of going out there to perform in front of people. And so like, because he gets to do that so much more frequently in professional wrestling, like that's something he really appreciates. And I don't know that I would have thought of that as a thing.
Right.
But it makes perfect sense to hear him say it.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, as far as like the differences and the similarities, we've talked before about how people used to assume that there was a big crossover between MMA and boxing, and there is some crossover appeal, some crossover audience, but that there's a lot more crossover, it seems, between MMA and pro wrestling, and that there's a lot more like similarities in how the businesses work. But I also feel like when you look at who's imitating who, these days it seems like it's MMA following pro wrestling more, doesn't it? Like there was a time,
right? And that's like a 180-degree switch from what you might have had a couple years ago.
Yeah, like 4 or 5 years ago, back when it was like the Undertaker's going to be out there trying to pull off a damn omoplata. Or was it Go-Go Plata that the Undertaker
Wait, do you mean, what does he call it? Like the Dragon's Gate? Like he has some name for it.
That's like some Eddie Bravo shit there. Naming all your moves, weird shit. But like it seemed like there was a whole thing where it seemed like the WWE was trying to look a little bit more like MMA and try to incorporate some of that stuff, maybe make it a little more realistic looking. And then now it seems like at least what the fighters are doing to try to get attention for themselves is more WWE style theatrics.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that MMA has impacted the way professional wrestlers work, right? They, you see a lot more running knees, you see a lot more low kicks, and despite the fact that it's still like somewhat theatrical looking. Like you see them trying to incorporate that because that's what people watch. And sometimes, if there's a notable exchange in an MMA fight, you'll see professional wrestlers kind of ape it for effect just after that in a professional wrestling match. But you're right. Now it seems like, maybe because, the salad days may not be upon us anymore in mixed martial arts, or because mixed martial arts is going through this sort of lull period. Like I do think you see more dudes like Colby Covington kind of trying to make themselves into these sort of larger than life, either good guy or bad guy personas. Clearly that worked for Conor McGregor. Although, I would say, and I think this is true in wrestling also, like one of the most important aspects of that, even if you are trying to play a character, is like legitimacy and believability, right? One of the reasons why it works so well for Conor McGregor is that it feels so effortless coming from him a lot of the time. It just feels like that's who Conor McGregor really is, turned up to 11 or 12 on the volume scale. Whereas I think if you get a guy like Colby Covington, it seems a little bit more contrived. And so, I think that relationship exists as well. But I think you're actually absolutely right that the two arts, let's go ahead and call them arts, certainly affect each other and change and shape each other and have this weird, like, almost love-hate relationship.
Here's a weird question for you before we close this one out. Say one of your kids, matter of fact, say all your kids, they come to you and they say, Dad, we've all thought it over and we've all decided to go into either pro wrestling or MMA. Which one would you want them to go into more?
Well, I would say wrestling, because then we would have an awesome, like, Von Erich style family.
Yeah, that worked out
wrestlers.
for them. That worked out really well for them, didn't it?
Okay, well, you don't have to point that out. We could do it without the curse, right? I mean, they're both pretty destructive. Like, I would be less happy than if all three of them said, "Hey, Dad, we're going to start an accounting firm together." Like, I would, as a parent, I would feel a little bit better about that.
3-piece bluegrass band.
Yes, yeah, there you go. We've already brainstormed potentially 2 better options for my children. Although I also don't know if you've ever seen my children like try to throw a ball or whatever, but it's possible we don't have the next 3 Bo Jacksons coming up in this house.
Well, maybe it's because their father doesn't believe in them. There, I said it.
Ouch, wow. Well, now we're going to have to take some time to let that sink in. But that's going to do it for listener mail. If you have a question, a comment, a concern that you would like to air to the podcast in future weeks, you know how to do it. You go to the website, comainevent.com, and click the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen that says email the podcast. That'll get you in touch with us. While you're there, you can sign up for the Breakfast of Champions newsletter. That comes out every Friday morning to catch you up on the news and notes that we miss on all the days that we're not recording the podcast. Stuff always happens. News always breaks. The newsletter itself is short. It's informative. We would love to tell you it's funny. And if you don't like it, it's really easy to unsubscribe. As for right now, though, we are going to go ahead and get started with round number 1.